challenges of Catholic schools. And they include the recognition of the success, the contribution that these schools make, particularly in the urban and inner city communities. But we're very, very aware of the struggle that the church faces in trying to sustain these schools. The significance of Catholic schools in the United States is well known. It's been the topic of numerous articles, editorials, op-ed pieces, particularly as problems grow, or seem to grow, in so many public schools. Catholic schools are seen as a reason for hope. They're a reason for hope, especially for low-income children in our urban settings. Catholic schools work, and that seems to be the conclusion of all of the studies. They work, and they succeed in educating children. This is one thing we don't want to forget when we get into the discussion of the effort to sustain Catholic education, particularly in the inner city. But as we've just seen in that very fine presentation, in many areas, these schools are becoming endangered species. President Bush at an April White House summit on inner city children and faith-based schools noted that nationwide, the inner city faith-based schools, and these include predominantly Catholic schools, are in fact facing a crisis. All the slides that we just saw confirm that. Why has this happened? One cause, obviously, is the population shift that was clearly demonstrated. Another major factor is the issue of finances. The two of them combined really determine the parameters of the crisis we face today. Yet, even in spite of these challenges, we can't walk away from our Catholic schools, and we certainly can't walk away from the extraordinary accomplishment of schools in the center city, in the inner city, in rural areas where the same demographic of need exists. Our schools work, and we have to find a way to keep them vibrant. And as was just quoted earlier, when he visited our country, Pope Benedict XVI chose, while he was at the Catholic University of America, to speak to educators, to highlight the importance of Catholic elementary and secondary schools, and particularly the impact that these schools have on our urban children. Affordability is critical if our parish schools are going to continue. Catholic schools are financed by tuition payments. Tuition payments never quite reach the actual tuition cost, the tuition that's set. Tuition yield never quite reaches what tuition is. But then in addition to that, there's a gap. There's a large gap between what tuitions bring in and what has to be paid to pay the actual cost of education. That comes from all kinds of sources. It comes from archdiocesan subsidies, it comes from parish subsidies, it comes from fundraisers, the traditional bingos on through bake sales to galas, golf tournaments to annual fund appeals. Some of the high schools receive a subsidy from the sponsoring religious community. These are all very important sources, but we need to begin to think differently. One of the reasons for the pastoral letter for the Archdiocese of Washington on education is to call all of us to think a little bit differently if we're going to face the financial challenges that are before us right now. And for this reason, I've asked our archdiocesan family to take a comprehensive look at education, to take a comprehensive look at how we fund Catholic education and how we can better serve our families. One of the projects that we have is a tuition assistance program. I've asked that we try something new. This year we began. The Archdiocese piloted a new version of tuition assistance. What we have always done is take a certain amount of the free will offerings that we have available to us and provide a pool of money for people who apply for tuition assistance. amount of money open to us to distribute is always fractional to the need. There's some $18 million worth of need indicated in past years, including last year, and we can meet only a fraction of that. What we decided to do this year was to take some of the money and use it in a different manner. Initially, 9 schools were given funds early to use as a basis, a pool, to invite people who were leaving the school or who simply couldn't meet the tuition cost, to invite them to consider, to reconsider sending their child to the school, knowing that there would be this specific, clearly defined, available fund of tuition assistance. The early results were so promising that we quickly expanded the program. You'll ask, where did you get the money to do that? We got the money to do that from donors who were persuaded to attempt to support this initiative to see if it actually would work. The result so far has been extremely promising. As of this past week, approximately $600,000 was given to some 25 schools, and it resulted in an increase of 445 students to our Catholic parochial schools who otherwise simply wouldn't be in those schools. All told, the Archdiocese has made available some $2 million in tuition assistance. And as I pointed out earlier, that's against a request of $18 million. But we can't carry on successfully this effort alone. The church simply cannot succeed in this extraordinarily wonderful venture of education, particularly for the center city and inner city alone. Partnerships are something we have to be a part of. And we have to invite into these partnerships a whole range of people and entities. Scholarship groups, families, businesses, foundations, and government. Considering the contribution that Catholic schools make in serving the broad community successfully, it makes sense. Last year alone, the Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Washington saved local governments close to $385 million in tax expenditures for public schools. If our schools were empty, that's the amount of money, aside from capital costs and building costs, that would have to be found to pay for the education of these children. It makes sense that if you have a program that's working, that's successful, and that saves the community money, there ought to be partnerships with the whole range of the community to sustain those schools.